Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Audrey from Audrey Approved. I'm in the middle right now of reading a book called American Terroir by Rowan Jacobson. And I realized the other day when I was looking at some of the Goodreads reviews that well, first of all, there weren't that many reviews. And secondly, I couldn't remember where I'd even come across this book because I hadn't ever heard anybody talk about it on BookTube. I hadn't seen it on Instagram. I hadn't seen it on, other people reading it on Goodreads that I follow or I'm friends with. And so that made me think, there really are quite a few, underrated books out there that I think people should check out. And so that has inspired me for today's video where I'm going to talk about, 6 or 7 books of various genres that I think are underrated. So maybe you've heard of these. If you have, that'd be great. We can chat about them. And if not, maybe they'll interest you in some sort of way. So the first genre is fantasy. And I'm going to talk about a book that I know that I have talked about before, but I don't think anybody else, I've come across anybody else that's talked about it before. That book is Coda by Simon Spurrier and illustrated by Matais Bergara. This is a graphic novel. And every time I describe this book, I use the same comparison because, I like the comparison, it always holds. But this is a graphic novel that I think combines elements of Mad Max, Lord of the Rings, and The Croods, which is like an animated film by DreamWorks. It's really good animated film. I really like the film. I think it's a really fun film. Anyway, and it's set in this kind of fantastical world where magic has disappeared. There's been some event and magic is gone from the world, and you follow a main character who is a bard or a musician, and he has this sidekick that is this like mutant unicorn. And the whole premise is that he's trying to save his wife. I'm gonna be purposely vague here because I think the fun of this story is seeing how it unfolds. But that's the setup, and it really goes from there. And our main character gets kind of involved in all this local power scheming, power broking that ends up happening. Now the plot is really fun in Coda, but by far the best thing about Coda is the art. And I'm gonna put some screenshots up as I talk about it. But it is this like kaleidoscopic, like colorful, really detailed, really chaotic art that I really need to spend time with. So I actually love reading this on like an iPad because you can like zoom in and see all the different elements that are added. And it's really this art and this art style that I think works so well with the storyline, and I just think is so much fun. This duo of Simon Spurrier and Matais Bergara have made other graphic novels with similar art styles. They've made a follow-up to Coda. They've also made a different graphic novel. But this original kind of Coda trilogy is my favorite. It is a completed story, so there are 3 completed volumes. You can binge it, you can read it all at once. And yeah, I think it is criminally underrated. I think it is so much fun. I love the world building. I love how it keeps me on the toes. I think Coda is a great read. So I'm not that big of a movie buff. I mean, there are films that I like, of course, and films that I will rewatch again and again. But I'm not huge into films. I don't watch a ton of movies. But I am really excited for Christopher Nolan's adaptation of the Odyssey, which I think was recently announced. I think it's coming out, not this year, but I think in 2026. And I anticipate books that talk about the Odyssey or retellings of the Odyssey will end up being, popular in the next year. So for an underrated retelling recommendation, I want to say ODY-C, Off to Far Ithicaa by Matt Fraction and illustrated by Christian Ward. And I think out of all of the books that I'm talking about in this video, this one will be the most divisive. It has objectively like a really low Goodreads rating. It's like, 3.2, 3.25, something like this. And it's definitely not going to work for everybody. But I thought it was really cool. This, again, is a graphic novel. So I'm mentioning 2 graphic novels today. And it is I would say, gender-swapped sci-fi version of the Odyssey. All the traditional male characters are now female. It's set in space. There's spaceships. But it follows very closely the events of the Odyssey. And I think what's kind of really special about it as well is that it uses kind of an epic poem format. So it's modern language, but it's using the structure of like Homer's original work. It's a little bit hard to explain. What it means is that the dialogue and the language is sometimes really confusing because it sounds old, but of course it's written in, modern terms. I don't know. I thought it was really unique and really different. I'd never come across it. I will say that if you aren't at all familiar with the Odyssey, at least some of like the plot points, like where Odysseus stops and stuff like that, then I think some of this might not resonate with people. I think if you're just coming to it fresh, it might be really confusing. But if you recognize how the authors have kind of turned the original scenes upside down, then I kept thinking it was a pretty creative read. I will caveat that it is, violent and kind of graphic, but I think so is the original text. And like Coda, it has really bright, really colorful art. It's not as chaotic as something like Coda, but it has almost like a psychedelic color palette, and I think that is really fun as well. For what it's worth, this first kind of volume is the only volume that follows the Odyssey, and it doesn't finish it, so you're gonna get partway cut off. There is a second volume called Odyssey, Sons of the Wolf or something like that, but that focuses more on like Helen of Troy and the Trojan War, as well as like almost an Arabian Nights kind of inspiration. So it doesn't continue with where this first volume ends. So it's an uncompleted series. I think it's not even planned to be completed because I don't think the reception was that great. But yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. I guarantee you have never read a graphic novel like it. Whether or not you will enjoy it, I don't know, but if your library has it, it's worth checking out. Okay, for fantasy romance, I actually want to recommend a whole series, and that is the Samaria series by Sharon Shinn, which I first read as like a teenager. I think these came out in the mid 90s, early 2000s, something like that. And I think there's 5 or 6 books in this original series. I'll put the cover for the first book up, which is Archangel. And this is set in a fantastical world, although some books have a bit of a sci-fi element, but a fantastical world to me that I think feels very much inspired by the Middle East. And you have kind of 2 populations of beings. You have angels and humans, and the angels are basically humans with wings. And if you read a lot of fantasy romance, then you know that there's a prevalence of fae or fairies in many fantasy romance series. And typically the fae characters are basically humans with wings. Maybe they're stronger or faster, whatever as well, but they're basically humans with wings. So they're called angels in the Samaria series, but it's very similar if you get what I'm talking about. And each of the books in this series follows a different romance. And so there's always a pairing that gets together. And as you move through the different series, you follow this world of Samaria across centuries, across different regions. So there are characters that come from different parts of this world, and so you learn a lot more about the culture and the politics of this world. I will say there is like a slight religious bent to this, and it's not like this is not like Christian romance or anything like that. There is a religious aspect in that many of the characters believe in kind of a higher being, and they communicate with this higher being through music. And so music ends up being something really important. And I would say for having a strong religious subplot, it doesn't come across as like preaching or lecturing or anything like that. It's just like a cultural or political aspect of the world building that this author has created. I really love this series. I will say that it is like nowhere near as spicy as any of the kind of more popular fantasy romances come out in the last few years. Maybe PG-13, maybe more like PG, but I don't know, they're heartwarming. Again, they're very nostalgic for me, so I'm curious if anybody else read these when they were a teen. And I think that they're just a really fun, easy, and bingeable kind of fantasy romance series to read. I reread them all during COVID, and I just had such a good time reminiscing and going back to this world. So if you've read it, let me know, but I highly recommend the Samaria series by Sharon Shinn. For a literary fiction recommendation, I want to talk about a book I read from the Read the World project. It's the book from France. I can't remember if I've talked about this in that reading series yet. I don't think I have. But it is the book Girl, written by Camille Lawrence and translated by Adriana Hunter. And this is an excellent pick for Women in Translation Month if you're already planning for that. This follows a single character across her life, across childhood, motherhood, and older age. And it makes a lot of commentary as to the role that women play within society. So if you really liked Kim Jae-young, 1982, 1983, you know what book I'm talking about. I'll put the cover up. If you liked that book and the commentary that it was making around Korean culture and gender roles in Korean culture, I would say that Girl is the version of that, but for France. One of the coolest parts about this book is the use of tenses. So in the first section, our main character is a child, and she uses first person because as a kid, you're mainly concerned with yourself, right? You're less concerned with others and how they are. When our main character moves into motherhood, she uses second person because now her focus is her own child, and so she's less focused on herself, she's focused on you, on the child in front of her. And then as she gets to older age and becomes, her children are grown up, we move to third person because there's this feeling that she's left out from society, that she's not as useful in society. So she becomes a she when she's being described. And I think this itself has a ton of commentary, but stuff like that made this book feel really smart. Like, I feel like this is a really smart read. It's a really good read. And I have never seen anybody else talk about it. Again, I mentioned this, but it would make a absolutely fantastic pick for Women in Translation Month. Not only because it's written by a woman, translated by a woman, but also because it's about being a woman. And so, again, I just think this is a really excellent read if you're looking for a literary fiction pick. On the topic of smart reads, if you have really enjoyed Ken Liu's The Paper Menagerie, if you've read Ted Chiang's Exhalation, if you've read Ted Chiang's Stories of Your Life and other stories, I think, then I think those books all kind of fall into this category that I bucket of like really smart, thought-provoking, takes a bit of focus to read sci-fi story collections. And so another book that I think falls into that category is an underrated book, and that is On the Origin of Species and Other Stories by Bo-Young Kim. Now, not every sci-fi collection has, banger after banger. So there's some in here that I didn't love. But many of the stories in here consider what it means to be human, consider what it means to be alive and living, whether you're a human wondering that or a robot wondering that. And there's a story in here that I particularly like that's the first story that has to do with almost like a Westworld setup. So there are elements of that in there. And overall, I just found this to be, again, smart and entertaining, and I think very, very much can be comparable to Ken Liu and to Ted Chiang. Now, I came across this book like physically, like in a bookstore, but I have seen Yenna from Modern Ajima talk about this book, or maybe she wrote a Goodreads review about it. So I have seen at least one other person talk about it, but not very many other people. So yeah, if you're looking for something that you can read piece by piece, short story collections are always nice because you can go really slowly through the collections, then I think this is a really good read. Okay, the last genre is nonfiction. I couldn't make this video without doing like an underrated nonfiction book. And so the book I'm going to talk about is The Last Leonardo, The Secret Life of the World's Most Expensive Painting by Ben Lewis. And that painting is Salvator Mundi, or Savior of the World, which is a painting of Jesus Christ painted by Leonardo da Vinci. And this painting was sold in 2017 for over $450 million. It was sold to the Saudi royal family, and it has not been seen since. And so this is a book all about that specific painting. This is an example of a book that I almost DNF'd. So I almost DNF'd it, and by the time I finished it, I gave it 5 stars. And the reason why I was going to DNF it is because I admit it's super meandering. It's kind of long, it goes down all these rabbit holes, I didn't understand the organization, and there wasn't actually a lot on like Leonardo da Vinci. And then I realized that what the author was doing was he was using this specific painting as a way to talk about art in general. And so the author talks about how difficult it is to establish provenance. So this painting was technically lost. It was gone. It came onto the market not that long before it was sold. And so the difficulty of doing that and confirming that, he talks about the role of restoration. So this painting was heavily damaged when it was found, and certain owners decided to do restorations to it. But at what point does the restoration make it not a Leonardo anymore? You know, some people argue that this painting is no longer Leonardo da Vinci because it has had so much restoration. The author talks about the role of art in politics. He talks about the role of art in economics, so how art can be used for money laundering, how art can be used to hold value, how there's a lack of regulation in the community. And so again, he's using this example as a way to talk about the entire contemporary fine art scene. All that being said, I think if you go into this with the right expectations, it's an excellent read. I think about the stuff that I learned about this kind of a lot, especially when I read other books about art or lost paintings or anything on the topic. So yeah, I think it's a highly underrated read. I have not heard anybody else talk about it in any videos or any posts or any reviews. And so if you like fine art, if you've enjoyed the videos that I've made on that subject, then this is another one to add to your TBR. That was 6 reads that I think more people should check out. So if any of those genres or books sounded good to you, let me know. If you've read any of them, let me know, and I will see you next time. Please take care. Bye.